A new level of ambition and excellence thrives at the Texas Tech System. A $2 billion higher education enterprise with 4 diverse and distinguished universities. Because from here, it's possible.
Hey, greetings, folks.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Good. Despite appearances, I'm the journalist and he's the senator. let me go through a few things. My name is Jon Ralston. I'm the editor and founder of the Nevada Independent, which is a relatively new news organization in Nevada. Senator, give me just one chance for a shameless plug, the NevadaIndependent.com. Check it out. On behalf of the Texas Tribune, and we modeled ourselves after the Tribune, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 8th annual Trib Fest, and I'm delighted to be here with Senator Merkley. Thanks for coming. This panel is presented by H&K Strategies. The corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event. Of course, they play no role at all in determining the panel's content, as the senator's about to find out. The panel's going to last about an hour, but I want to save time. The senator will take questions for about 15 minutes or so at the end. If you have such questions, there will be a mic out in the audience, and you can grab it or try to grab it and ask some questions. If there are no questions, then the senator will be subjected to more questions from me. I want to remind everybody that if you have cell phones, sometimes you forget, please silence them. If you would. I almost forgot to do that before Did you silence yours, Senator?
I passed it off.
Senator and I were watching what's going on in Washington, as many of you are, right before we got out here, but now we have silenced our phones. Let me tell you just real briefly, in case you don't know, a little bit about Senator Merkley. He went to both Stanford and Princeton. He served some time in the Oregon House, where he eventually became Speaker. He beat an incumbent by the name of Gordon Smith in 2008 to become a senator and won re-election in 2014. He is known as one of the more fervent progressives in Washington, D.C. And every story I see about Senator Merkley is, oh, don't forget, he endorsed Bernie Sanders, and he was the only one of his colleagues to do so. It's like you have to have that like as an apposition to your name. I have some information, though, that he may endorse someone different in 2020, and maybe we'll talk about that. Welcome, Senator Jeff Merkley, please. So, Senator, let's talk about what's on everyone's mind and what we were mesmerized by in the green room. As many of you know, the Senate Judiciary Committee is about to, or has, as I'm talking, vote out the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh to the floor. You have been fairly vocal about this. You said that Christine Ford has been treated worse than Anita Hill. You're essentially appalled and embarrassed by it. Expound a little bit more on that.
I sure will, but first I want to say how great it is to be here in Austin. I always hear from people here how Austin had the slogan, "Keep Austin Weird," before Portland, Oregon had its slogan, "Keep Portland Weird." So thank you for letting us borrow it. But we do have Portlandia, and I haven't heard Austlandia on the television yet, so. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here and to address really important issues. At this very moment, as we sit here, history is occurring on Capitol Hill, and not a history we will be proud of. Back in 1991, when Anita Hill brought forth her experience, the committee proceeded to say, everyone who has insight on this, we want to hear from them. And there were 3 days of testimony. There were numerous witnesses, numerous people with insights that came before the committee. That has not happened in this instance. Only one individual with no corroborating support or other individuals who have similar experience has been allowed to come. Back in 1991, the moment this occurred, the president stepped in and said, we're doing the background investigation. We're going to have the FBI see what light they can shed on this situation. This time, Trump absolutely refused to have the FBI reopen the background investigation, not a criminal investigation, background investigation. This is why I'm saying we're treating Dr. Ford worse than Anita Hill. And there's so much wrong about this. They deliberately set it up as a he said, she said, with no supporting information so that individuals, Republicans, could stand up and say, we just don't know. We heard from one person, they said it happened, 100%. We heard from the other person, said it didn't happen, 100%. So who are we to know? Well, it is a shameful moment that the R11, the 11 Republicans, refused to push the president to reopen the investigation to get the facts, refused to allow the other individuals to come before the committee.
I guess what I'm wondering, and this is to play devil's advocate a little bit, Senator, is opening it up, doing an FBI investigation, as many, as you saw, of your colleagues tried to get Judge Kavanaugh to commit to, would that really get any more facts? Would it really get any more than the senators and have been able to get so far? People have brought up Mark Judge should have been subpoenaed to testify, but it's unlikely he would have provided any information at all. Do you really think? A lot of people are cynical about both sides, right? They think the Democrats are just trying to delay this to pass the election for obvious reasons. So where is the heft here, I guess, is what I'm asking.
The answer is the FBI would have provided additional information. There's several other women who had experiences to share. There's facts to be tracked down. Even Dr. Ford said, as a piece of this, I can tell you that I ran into Mark Judge at the grocery store. So help me know when he worked there, and I can give you maybe I can help you construct more of this information. Absolutely, the FBI, and it's standard to do this when new information comes up. So there's no justification for failing to do it.
You went to a very extreme length. It's never been done before. You actually went to court. I don't know how many people in the audience are aware of it, and filed an injunction, which you must, to try to stop this. You must have known that was going to go nowhere, though.
Well, I don't know it's going to go nowhere. I was just assigned to a judge yesterday. We are in an untested waters. Here's what happened. We have a constitution that's been constructed very deliberately to have a balance on the president when it comes to who's appointed to the executive branch. And the founders debated this at length. They considered giving the appointment power completely to the Senate, or they called it the Assembly, and said no. You'd get too many people saying, well, I'll have my person in this position, you get your person in that position. So a single individual to take responsibility, that's the president, will give him power of nomination. But the president might go off track and appoint people of unfit character. That's the term that Hamilton used. So therefore, the Senate was charged with investigating whether a person was a fit character. So that's a complete separation. The two are not supposed to interfere with each other. And for as far as I can determine to this point, and because it's so fresh, we don't have a full historical review, this is the first time that a president has reached out, sealed off 3 years of the individual's record, so we have nothing at all from those 3 years, proceeded to block 100,000 records from his time as on the legal counsel team, and did so with executive privilege delegated to a Republican lawyer who used to work with Kavanaugh. So essentially, that's about as rigged as you can get. And then proceeded to have that individual mark 140,000 documents, committee confidential, so the public could not see them and we could not discuss them with the public or with the experts or our constituents, anyone. That is such a gross violation of separation of powers that it's important for the court, which is charged with protecting the Constitution, to step in and say, this process cannot go forward until the Senate gets those documents and can review the record. So that's what I'm asking for.
Do you honestly think that a court will give you a favorable ruling on something like that? I mean, I guess what some people might think, and I'm not saying I'm one of those, Senator, but what some people might think is this is just a publicity stunt. You know, Merkley might want to run for president. We'll get that in a moment. He's just trying to get his name out there by doing something that essentially is a fool's errand.
You know, it's so frustrating to me that when we have an absolutely gross violation of the Constitution, to hear people talk about, well, maybe this is a publicity stunt. And I must say the mainstream press There have been a number of changes in the development of our institutions that they have really missed. For example, in 2017, the Senate didn't vote on a single amendment outside of the reconciliation process. It was completely blocked by the majority leader, so it could not be a deliberative body. And the press just ignored it, and they're ignoring this huge travesty as well. And so I want the press to wake up and do something to help us put this nation and these institutions back on track.
I'm supposed to be asking the harsh questions here, and he's attacking the media already. Less than 10 minutes in, my goodness. Let's talk about some of the institutional changes that have been made. And it's interesting because someone you remember from my state, Harry Reid, is widely either credited or blamed for some of those changes, both in the comity in the Senate and changing the rules of the filibuster, which then Mitch McConnell took advantage of for Supreme Court justices as a way to get Neil Gorsuch through. I don't know if people know this, but I think you stood up on the floor of the Senate for, what was it, 15 hours of filibustering Gorsuch. Are you going to do the same thing?
15 and a half hours.
Sorry, I'd see.
I very much supported the change in the rules when we went to a simple majority for executive nominees and for lower judges because the Republicans had declared war on President Obama. They were not letting him fill basically any judicial positions or executive positions. And we actually had an intensive meeting, a private meeting of senators in the old Senate chambers when we're all in there and just burying our hearts and saying, let's save this institution. And my Republican colleagues stood up and said, you're right, we're going to stop, we're going to let these nominations through. And that was good for about 4 or 5 weeks or something like that. And then they started blocking everything again. And I remember John McCain confronting one of his colleagues in the aisle and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because he knew where this was headed. And where it was headed was that if they were going to declare war, completely abuse the advice and consent process to attack and disable the executive branch, they're going to weaponize, if you will, advice and consent, then we had to change it so that the executive could function and judges could be considered. But we left the Supreme Court as a supermajority because all those other court decisions, those can all get overturned up the way. But we felt that at the Supreme Court level, to have integrity, you needed to have a nominee who could pull more broadly. That was so important. And that is what Mitch McConnell changed.
Are you planning on standing up on the floor for 15 and a half hours again?
No.
You're not?
No.
Why not?
You know, and I'll tell you, here's a challenge. Mitch is going to file cloture, meaning a motion to close debate, the first second that this is on the floor. So once that's done, you cannot delay the process. And so while I could speak at length, I could try to speak at length again. You know, when I undertook that, I went up to the well, and I said, I'm going to talk for a little while about this, and if you don't mind staying late, because I was starting at the end of it was like 6:30 p.m., so I'd already been up all day, and they said, for how long? And I said, well, I don't know. You can't sit down and you can't go to the restroom. I didn't know how long I'd last, so I thought it might be 3 or 4 hours. I got to midnight East Coast time, and I said, okay, made it. That's good. And then I thought, that's only 9 p.m. out on the East Coast, on the West Coast. And folks back home, I got to go to midnight. So that was another 3 hours. By then I was feeling pretty good. So it was a new day.
I want to move on from this discussion, unless there's anything else you want to say. But some folks here might want to know if you've had conversations with any of the supposed key votes that might still be able to block Kavanaugh on the floor. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski are most often named. Have you talked to them? Do you have any inside information to present right here in this church? God is watching, sir.
I've shared some of my thoughts with some of my key colleagues, but they're keeping their own counsel. And I was very disappointed this morning when Jeff Flake announced that he was going to proceed. I know he struggled with it. I think he's making the wrong decision for our country, but I respect the fact that at least he struggled.
I guess what I'm wondering, to move the conversation beyond, excuse me, what happened during this confirmation fight, is this is seen by, I think, a lot of people in America, no matter what their ideology is yet another sign that Washington is broken, that there's so much dysfunction, that everything is tribalism on both sides. Frankly, you've been there almost 10 years now. I'm wondering if you've seen progression or devolution, or however you want to describe it, and give people any kind of hope. Can you give people any kind of hope that this is going to change, Senator?
I'm not optimistic, and here's why. Here's what's happened. If we turn the clock back to 2014, you had the Koch brothers decide to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to take control of the U.S. Senate. They spent the money in Louisiana, Arkansas, North Carolina, Iowa, Colorado, Alaska, and it made a difference. And those seats were flipped from blue to red, and they have owned the Senate ever since. The reason that Merrick Garland didn't get a debate and vote, because the 1% coalition led by the Koch brothers was telling Mitch McConnell what to do. And when they tell him what to do, he says, "How high do I jump?" You say jump, how high? And they came after me in 2014 too. And so they started spending through all these front groups and with all these nice names like Generation Opportunity and Freedom Partners, you've heard of them. And I told my team, I said, I'm going to put up an ad, I'm going to attack the Koch brothers. And my team said, that is like the single worst idea you've ever had. And I said, look, if I'm going to lose because these groups are attacking me in every which way, I'm going to go down swinging. But I wrote the ad because my team didn't want to. And it basically said out-of-state oil and coal billionaires have come to Oregon to elect my opponent, Monica Webby. They share an agenda. Here it is. Great investment for the Koch brothers. Terrible choice for Oregon. And in a month, they left. I think we have to tear down the false front that the Koch brother cartel are using all across this nation. We kicked them out of Oregon. We need to kick them out of every single other state in this union. And if you want to understand what happened in 2017, it's simply this, the 1% coalition. They spent most of the year trying to rip down health care for some 30 million people, depending on the version of the bill. Only John McCain saved us. Thank you, John McCain. And then they proceeded to do a tax bill that took $1.5 trillion out of the Treasury and gave it to the wealthiest Americans. Now, I hold a town hall an average of every 10 days in Oregon. I go to all my 36 counties, open town hall every year, and most of my counties are red. So I hear the whole Fox News side of things continuously. But I can tell you no one has ever come to a town hall and said, I have this great idea. Let's take a whole lot of money, maybe $1 trillion or more out of the Treasury, and give it to the richest Americans and the wealthiest corporations. People come and say, we want to invest in health care. We want to invest in housing. We want to invest in education. We want to invest in infrastructure and living wage jobs. They don't say, steal from the Treasury and give it to the richest. And that's exactly what happened last year, and that's the battle we're in. We've been taken over with a vision, not we the people under our Constitution, but government by and for the powerful. So that's why it's not going to end. The rich are going to keep spending to keep this differential of power. We're in a deeply troubled area, and this Supreme Court nomination right now is all about this battle.
Did you prepare these lines for applause?
No, but thank you all.
Let me just ask you about some of the things that you just said, because I think some people might wonder what you're saying about the Koch brothers and Freedom Partners, which is very active in my state, Nevada, now trying to win a Senate race. There's no question it's manifest, it's true. But I think what some people might wonder are the human interactions. Look what you just said about Mitch McConnell, that they say jump and he says how high. If you don't get past that kind of rhetoric, Senator, how can you ever, I mean, you must believe some of your Republican colleagues have integrity and can stand up to that kind of pressure, just like I think a lot of people say, you know what, if Move On or some progressive group tells Jeff Merkley to do something and he doesn't want to do it, he won't do it, right? When you talk about human beings in those kinds of terms, it contributes to the coarsening of everything, doesn't it?
I think we have to be absolutely honest about what's happening here in the United States of America. When Antonin Scalia died, within hours, Mitch McConnell came to the floor and said there will be no debate and no vote on this, on whomever Obama nominates. And why did that happen? He said it's because there's a tradition of not proceeding to debate a Supreme Court nominee in an election year. That was a complete lie to America, a complete lie. 15 times before, we've had an empty vacancy in an election year. 15 times before, the Senate has debated. 15 times before, they voted. They didn't always confirm, but they always took a vote and took responsibility for their position. When you have the majority leader lying to the American people, we have to call it out.
You know, it's interesting. You know, they haven't clapped for one of my questions yet. It's very rude. No, I'm kidding.
I'll ask you a question.
Yeah, that's right. Ask me a question. So let's talk about that, because what you're saying is you have to call it out, that telling the truth may be at times difficult and painful, even politically dangerous, but you have to do it. Which gets, I think, to the battle that's going on within the Democratic Party now that you are at the center of. What do we really stand for? Do we stand with win at all costs? Even in the last presidential election, you knew Bernie Sanders was a big underdog, yet you stood up and said, I support him because he supports the values that you believe in. What's the future of this roiling debate? It's already being talked about in 2020, even in 2018, how candidates should behave. What should the Democratic Party stand for? How do you resolve this kind of internal civil war?
If we were to pick any group of you and we were to sit here for a moment and I'd say what you're most concerned about, I would bet you a lot of money that within a minute I'd hear at least 2 or 3 of 4 things. It'd be healthcare, and the complexity, the stress, and the cost of our existing system. It would be housing and the unaffordability of it, the ratio of buying or renting a house compared to what it used to be to a working income. It would be education, both the challenge for our K-12 schools and certainly for the restoring career technical education and the cost of college. It would be living wage jobs. Those are the foundations for families. That's what we're fighting for an America, in our America, where every family has the opportunity to thrive. This is very personal for me. My dad was a machinist, a union machinist, a mechanic. He worked at a sawmill, kept the machinery running, loved it. Company bought the company that had it and sold all the timber to another company, shut it down overnight. So all the people who had bought houses in this little community suddenly are stranded. And we moved, and then we moved again. But my father kept saying, son, if you go through the doors of that schoolhouse and you work hard, you can do just about anything because we live here in America. And I love that vision in which every child has an opportunity to thrive no matter which side of the railroad tracks you come from. And that's the vision we have to fight for in this country, and we are losing it. It is much harder now to go to college than when I got out of college. You know, one of the reasons I keep talking about debt-free college is because when I got out of high school, if you were going to a public university and you came home and you ate out of the fridge for the summer, you could save the money to pay the tuition. That's just not true today. And so that's the fundamentals. And then in addition to the foundations for a family to thrive, we have got to take on the stewardship of our planet. The world carbon pollution is soaring like this. You know, and this is why the Koch brothers are investing so much money to control our country. I noticed in Australia they just kicked out the prime minister because he was concerned about the outback is burning, their coral reefs are dying. And so they said we need a more coal-friendly prime minister. And Germany's signing up for a new generation of natural gas from Russia. And Japan's converting to liquefied natural gas. We lock in fossil fuels for another generation, we are in such deep trouble. We're already in deep trouble. In my home state right now, we have to artificially change the acidity of the Pacific Ocean in order for baby oysters to survive. Because carbon dioxide creates carbonic acid, acidifies the water. We have fires that are burning longer, hotter in the summer, tons of smoke damage, tons of damage to the forests. We have warmer winters. It's great for pine beetles, terrible for pine trees. The list goes on across this country. So we need to take on fiercely the fossil fuel world. We need to do so, and we need to accelerate. It's why I introduced Keep It in the Ground in 2016, saying we shouldn't extract our citizen-owned fossil fuels. It's why last year I introduced Mission 100, the vision of going to 100% clean and renewable energy. We have to accelerate that effort, and then we have to help lead the world to save this planet.
Let's let's talk about some of the things you said in terms of values in the Democratic Party and saying some of these kinds of things. You mentioned debt-free college. Bernie Sanders talked a lot about not just debt-free, but almost free college. And eventually Hillary Clinton actually had to move toward him, because a lot of people believe in what you're saying. Healthcare is a great example, too. I think you're right. Healthcare is the #1 issue for maybe even a majority of the people. You look at some of the polls. Medicare for all is something that you believe in, but even you can't even get everybody in the Democratic Party to come on board with that. Is it reasonable if someone is out there just hypothetically running for president, saying these kinds of things, to say, that's great, I believe in that too, but you've got to show me a way that we're going to pay for this. You need to have a detailed plan, because you don't know I don't think you're the kind of guy that says, I'm just giving away candy to the public. I'm going to tell you, I believe in this, and this is how I'm going to do it.
Well, so I've introduced a bill called Medicare Option for All, or Choose Medicare, and it's basically a public option. So it is a start on the pathway, and it says, look, we're already companies are spending all kind of money on health insurance. Why not enable them to buy a Medicare public option? Individuals on the exchange are spending their money and tax credits already. Why not enable them to spend it on a Medicare option? So that's an example that doesn't really cost money. And then the other part of it is when people go from one world of insurance to another that is cheaper, the cost of society overall is actually less. The question is how much comes out of the public ledger versus the private ledger, and we have to wrestle with that. But the fact is, we are paying almost twice in terms of the percent of our GDP for healthcare that the rest of the developed world is paying. Why is it, for example, that we have all of these drugs that are essentially invented based on research that we pay for as taxpayers, not Canadian taxpayers, not European taxpayers, but us, and then we get charged the highest prices? Why not just simply say that a drug company can't charge Americans more than they charge Canadians and Europeans? We'd have a fabulous decrease in the cost of drugs overnight. We have to be able to take on these issues.
But you do agree that if Jeff Merkley puts out a plan for debt-free education or these kinds of things, that you should also have to say, and here's how I'm going to pay for it, whether it's by offsets of some kind or not.
Well,
right?
Let me give you an example. The Republicans passed this tax bill last year. They spent $1.5 trillion of the public funds to enrich the richest Americans. How about we spend $1.5 trillion on health care and education and housing and infrastructure in this country? Good. And by the way, there was a continuing resolution that the last minute, an extra $80 billion beyond what the Defense Department wanted was put in for 2 years, so basically $160 billion. And people came and said, do you know what half of that would have done to make college affordable? What half of that would have done to address affordable housing in America? I mean, we are making big choices as a country. Now, when I came out of graduate school, I was planning on working in developing countries. I'd studied economics, and I was at the World Bank getting ready to save up money and then go work in the field. But as it turned out, I was a finalist to be a presidential fellow for Secretary Weinberger. And the interview kind of went like this. You can imagine these generals, these admirals, top civilians, and then they have a chair out in the middle with a spotlight on it. And they say, why would we ever, first question, like, why would we ever hire you? You worked with the Quakers. They have the peace testimony in villages in Mexico. Your mentor was Senator Hatfield. He votes against the defense appropriations. And I'm thinking, that's a great question. I had no idea how I became a finalist. But I went on to say, listen, national security is so much broader than simply military might. And they hired me. And the reason I took that job was because the biggest threat to the planet was nuclear war. We were on a hair trigger, and we had some very close calls in which both sides almost launched nuclear weapons thinking the other side had attacked them. And basically the point here is that when we see big challenges, we've got to jump in and do everything we can to take them on. And one of the big challenges I mentioned was this issue of the fundamentals for families to thrive, and another is the stewardship of our planet. But there's something that's beyond all that, and that's three forces that are basically taking the soul out of our democracy. And well, I hope I have the right...
Yeah, they don't even know what you're going to say yet.
I
and
hope
they go
I
agree
describe
with
it
you.
right. But one is gerrymandering. Right now, the Democrats would be in charge of the U.S. House of Representatives if it wasn't for gerrymandering. And you've seen some of that right here at home in Texas. And the second is voter suppression. If you really believe in the vision of our country, you believe in voter empowerment, not voter suppression. And the third is the dark money unleashed by Citizens United. These three things combined, if we want to take on the family issues, if we want to take on the issue of saving our planet, we have also got to take on those three forces, which comes back to why this decision about the Supreme Court that's happening right at this very moment is so important. Because Kavanaugh does not believe in taking on any of those three forces that are destroying our vision of a we the people.
You ever take any dark money?
Well, not that I know of. You don't take it. It's spent through third parties.
I meant as a head it helped you. But I guess since you brought up Kavanaugh again and you brought up the Supreme Court, I just want to go back to that again because a lot of people do think that this is going to fundamentally change public policy in many, many different areas, as you mentioned. So what do you do about that if that's true? Because I think you'd agree it's more likely than not that Kavanaugh is going to be on the Supreme Court. And so if he is, what do you do about that as someone in a different branch of government?
You know, I'm holding out to the last minute that my colleagues come to their senses. A couple weeks ago, there was a circuit court nominee named Ryan Bounds. And Ryan had written incredibly racist stuff in college. Then he had lied to our committee in Oregon. And then it proceeded that Chuck Grassley overrode the blue slip process for the first time in U.S. history, that Senator Wyden and I had both opposed him. And so I started calling up my Republican colleagues. There had been a 51-49 vote to close debate, and everybody said, "It's over, Jeff. Stop, stop." And so there I am, the night before the final vote. I'm calling up one colleague after another. I'm saying, "Have you read what he wrote? Do you know he lied to our community? And have you thought about what it means to override 2 blue slips? Because someday this may mean that your voice is disregarded." One senator said, "Send me the writings." And it was Tim Scott. It was Tim Scott. And Tim Scott stood up before his caucus the next day and said, "This man is unsuited to be a circuit court judge, and I am not voting for him." And his entire caucus then, when they didn't have the 51 votes,
right,
backed down and said, "Okay." By late afternoon, Mitch McConnell called the president and said, "Withdraw the nomination." We could have forced a vote on the floor, and we could have defeated him at that point. But we were gracious in that we allowed the president to withdraw the nomination. That was a last-second victory. That's why you stay on the battlefield and you keep fighting to the very last moment. And it shouldn't take one member of the Senate to get this right. And it shouldn't have to be females members of the Republican Party to get this right. It should be completely bi-gender and bipartisan.
How sad was it and I know all about what you just talked about, that you had to get the one African-American member to take a look and see that the guy had these racist rights. That's what it took, right? I mean, that's just sad. I want to cover a couple other things before we open it up for questions, Senator. One is something that you've gotten a lot of attention for. Last I looked, Oregon is not a border state, and yet you took the lead in saying, "I'm going to go down to the border and see what's going on with family separation." And what you found down there caused a lot of ripples. I know our senator went down there after you did and had some of the same experiences. I'm talking about Senator Cortez Masto, whom you know went down there, was not allowed in to facilities. What compelled you to decide, you know what, and this was at the beginning, before this became a big cause celeb nationally, you decided, I'm going to go down to the border and see what's really going on?
So on I think it was May 7th, Jeff Sessions did a speech in which he announced this new zero tolerance proposal. And I'm reading it and I'm thinking, it sounds to me like when families flee persecution and they wash up on the shores of America, they're not going to be greeted by Lady Liberty. They're going to be greeted by border guards who will treat them as criminals. They're going to lock up the parents, and what are they going to do with the children? And I thought, they can't be talking about taking children away from their parents. Surely, Sessions said they wanted to send a message of deterrence. Surely they're not going to traumatize kids in order to send a message of quote, deterring people from coming to America, fleeing persecution. After all, we're a nation of almost all of us are immigrants, or descendants of immigrants. Families fled persecution, fled famine, fled war. We understand what it's like to flee, and we certainly wouldn't have wanted our parents or our grandparents or wherever back to be treated as criminals while they're awaiting an asylum hearing. And so I said, I have to go find out. So I arranged to fly down on a Sunday, and I went to the McAllen Processing Center. That's the name they give it. It sounds kind of a spooky name. And outside there were all this press, and the press said, "What's going on inside?" And I said, "Well, I haven't been inside, but surely you all have been." And they're like, "No, we've been blocked from going inside and seeing what's happening." That really kind of sent chills down my spine, that the press in America couldn't see, because that suggests maybe something bad is happening. I go in, I see these chain link enclosures that look like dog kennels, with families huddled into them, with a Mylar blanket, no mattresses. And that holding area was bad, but what was really bad was the warehouse, one building over, and you're internally connected through rooms. I walk into this warehouse, and you have big chain link enclosures, like 30 by 30 foot, and the folks escorting me said, "Well, we'll show you the bathrooms." I don't want to see the bathrooms. We'll show you the medical station. I don't want to see medical station. We'll show you the kitchen. No, I want to know what's going on with these chain link cages. And so we stop in front of this cage with about, there's several dozen boys in it, and they're lining up by height, from the smallest to the tallest, and the smallest is just knee-high to a grasshopper. And I'm looking at this little kid thinking, he's like 4 years old. And I said, "Are these boys that have been taken away from their parents?" They said, "Well, not all of them." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" They said, "Well, some came across as unaccompanied minors. Their parents were not with them." I said, "But the others, their parents were with them?" They said, "Yes." I said, "Well, where do you do this?" "Well, we bring the family in that door over there, and as soon as they come in the door, we take the boy, put him in this cage." They didn't say cage, but that's what they look like. The Washington Post gave me Pinocchio's.
I was going to talk about that, right?
And I mean, everybody calls them that now because that's what they look like. And then they put the mother over there and the father over there, and you could kind of get a sense that kids are like peering through this warehouse trying to see where their family members are and what's going to happen to them. So that was an incredible moment to see this criminalization and this traumatization of kids. And then I went up the road to Brownsville because an immigration advocate told me that they were putting hundreds of boys into this one building, this one Walmart, former Walmart. And they said, we think there might be 1,000 boys who have been warehoused in this former Walmart. And I said that, actually. So I'm approaching it. We'd asked for permission to get in. We'd been denied. I'd asked for a waiver. It'd been denied. And I thought, if I just knock on the door, surely this facility, somebody will come out and talk to me or give me a tour. And so I call up the phone number that's posted on the front of the building, and the head of the operation, his secretary said, "Oh yeah, he'll come out and talk to you." I call up 10 minutes later, say I'm still waiting. Well, they were waiting for the police cars to arrive to arrest me. They didn't arrest me because they hadn't actually asked me to leave the grounds yet. But they absolutely refused to talk about what's going on inside. You know, it didn't turn out that there were 1,000 boys in there, in this one building. It was almost 1,500. 1,500. They had gone a few months earlier, they had 300. 2 months earlier, they had 500. Suddenly, they had 1,500, or actually, I think they said 1,467. And can you imagine all those boys sharing a soccer field? Can you imagine all of them sharing like one broken foosball table? I mean, and I said, you had this huge expansion from 300 to almost 1,500. So what? And so I went back, by the way. I went back 2 weeks later with a congressional delegation, and suddenly they gave me a waiver to get in. I had reinforcements. And because a lot of press had noticed what had happened. So I got inside, And I said to the head of Southwest Keys, the executive director or president of the organization, I said, you expanded so dramatically, what are you missing? He said, well, we're missing 90 mental health counselors. And I said, so you expanded, but you couldn't find mental health counselors for these traumatized children? He said, that's right. He said, we went to Puerto Rico to try to get mental health counselors. Well, they're hard to hire because they have jobs. And it is a dark and evil place, and I'm so glad the press did amplify this. The court did intervene. But you know what the administration is trying to do now is they're trying to establish internment camps, and they're trying to lock up the kids with their parents behind barbed wire. Let me tell you, kids belong in homes and playgrounds and schools. They don't belong behind barbed wire. And I should add one point. And people say, well, what about the administration's whole argument about catch and release, as if they'll never show up for a hearing? So the program was called Family Case Management Program. You can look it up on the internet. The Inspector General did a report on it, and the report found, and this is a statistic I find incredible, but with a case manager who knows where they are, who speaks their language, the IG found 100% of the families showed up for their hearings. There is no excuse in the world to treat these families like
You know, it's interesting, Senator, you brought up you brought up the Washington, after you came back and you said some things, the Washington Post did a fact check on you and gave you 3 Pinocchios. There's no way there's...
They gave me 4.
I think they gave you 4, and they reduced it. I'm going to talk about that. And they said, no, there's no way they're in cages. This is nonsense. And then as more and more attention came to this, because of the scrutiny that you gave it, they actually reduced it to only 2 Pinocchios because they found that some other things that you said weren't quite right. It seems to me this is the kind of thing where politicians are known for hyperbole and exaggeration. Man, this is just horrifying on its own. You don't have to exaggerate it, right?
No, and I should have been 0 Pinocchios. They were wrong on both counts. I try to get it as accurate as I can. I mean, I was very reluctant to say in front of that Brownsville Walmart that there might be 1,000 kids inside, but I said it because the immigration advocates had said that that might be the case, and even as I said it, I thought I shouldn't say that. It's impossible. But I'm always trying to, I feel like you have to try to be clear but be accurate, and that's important to public dialogue. And the challenge we're in now, we're in a world right now, we have a president who is the divider-in-chief. He campaigned on division. This is what petty tyrants do around the world to gain power, is to try to pitch one group of people against another. We have a phrase in the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible. And we say that because we know we come from backgrounds all over the world, but we have come together to make a stronger, more powerful, more beautiful nation, in part because of the variety of experiences and talents that we bring to create one indivisible America. And so we need to reject these politics of division, of bigotry, of hate, of racism that are coming out of the Oval Office. We need to reject it in November, and we need to reject it in November 2020 as well.
I'm just gonna cover one more topic, and I hope there'll be some questions. So get them ready. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a mic out there. I can't see that well, but I'm sure it'll be out there somewhere. But I just want to cover one last topic with you, Senator, and maybe you can guess what it is, since you mentioned the president. A year ago, almost exactly a year ago, there was a headline that said, "You are the new head of the vast left-wing conspiracy." How's that going?
If by conspiracy we mean ordinary grassroots Americans who were on the sidelines saying we can't be on the sidelines any longer, we have to jump in and we have to fight for our communities, we have to fight for our nation, there's a lot of energy where people are jumping in. I've seen it all through this country. People appalled by what's happening, and determined to change that. And I think we're going to see evidence of that November 6th.
You have started up something called the Blue Wave Project. You've been raising some money. You've been helping candidates across the country. You've, for some reason, found it necessary to go to Iowa and New Hampshire, which are the two least important early states. Nevada is the most important one, and so I'm very disappointed. You really are seriously thinking about running for president, are you not?
I'm exploring it very seriously, yes, and including going to Nevada, by the way. I haven't missed you. In my life, when I am angry about the way things are, I've tried to say, what can I do to change that? It's what got me to run for the state legislature in Oregon. It's what made me quit my job in Oregon and organize Democrats to take back the House so that we could actually pass things in Oregon. It's what caused me to jump in and take on Gordon Smith when everyone said nobody can win this race against this individual. And it's what's motivating me now to explore the possibility. I think we have got to do a 180-degree turn here towards thriving families, a healthy planet, and taking on these forces, these ugly voter suppression, dark money, gerrymandering forces that are destroying our nation.
You know, it's interesting, and after this question, please come and line up, and there's the mic if you want to ask questions. Even though I have obviously astronomically increased your name recognition through this discussion.
Well done.
You're welcome. There are a lot better known prospective Democratic candidates, and you have been asked, I believe, well, would you step aside if Elizabeth Warren got in? And you've said essentially not necessarily to all that. What does Jeff Merkley bring to this discussion that makes you think, you know, beyond the cliche that everyone who becomes a senator obviously thinks about running for president, what is it that you bring? What is unique about your voice that is causing you to explore this?
You know, I come from a blue-collar family, and I live in the same neighborhood, the same blue-collar neighborhood today that I was in from third grade through graduating from high school. And I see with my neighbors every single day the impact on these fundamental issues. And it is a journey in which I have tried to say, take this short lifetime that we have on this planet and make the world a better place. You know, my mother had three basic principles. She said, do what's right, do your best, and never ever step on anyone else to get ahead. Can you imagine what would happen if my mother had 10 minutes with Donald Trump? I'd like to arrange that because I think my mother may be able to save our nation.
All right, I see there's some questions. We got about 12, 13 minutes, so try to keep the questions brief, and if you can, keep the answers relatively brief.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. Yes. So my question is related to net neutrality. That was an issue that was very prominent in the past couple of years as the net neutrality rules enacted by the Obama administration were revoked, and later on there were some attempts by Congress to invoke the CRA to try and reinstate those rules. So my question is, what is the prognosis on net neutrality both in the remainder of this Congress and in succeeding Congresses and administrations?
Yeah. So net neutrality is a basic concept that the internet should be equal access for all, that you shouldn't have a fast lane for the rich and everyone else is stuck behind a slow truck equivalent on the internet. I think it's a fundamental issue of fairness and democracy. The Senate did defeat the effort to abolish net neutrality, but the House didn't, I think just by one vote. I think Democrats take the House. We have a great opportunity to restore net neutrality, and I hope we get it done right away.
Thank you for coming, Senator. The Republicans say that their agenda on guns is driven by the Second Amendment, their agenda on health care is driven by individual liberty, and their agenda on immigration is driven by protecting American jobs. To what extent would you say that the real agenda behind all of these policies is essentially racism, and that that's become the defining trait of the Republican Party today?
Well, I wouldn't say all their positions are driven by racism. I would say there's a lot of racism in their immigration policy. Absolutely. When the president says, I don't want those immigrants, but if they were Norwegians, well, different story. I mean, that's racism as bald and direct as you can get.
What did he call those countries again? I forget. Do you remember?
It was not complimentary.
Right.
So I wouldn't use that as the single driving force, and I wouldn't use it on their economic policy. Their economic policies, it's about money for the rich, raid the national treasury, and ignore the fundamentals for families.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming here, Senator Merkley. I have 2 questions for you. The second one's very brief. First one is that House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi has suggested that if we take back the House this cycle, she wants to reinstate the pay-go rule, that any Democrats, any new legislation, you have to find a way to pay for it without adding to the deficit. That's my understanding of it. If it's wrong, please correct me. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you're a pretty progressive Democrat, and you want to, we want to see these big sweeping changes, but the pay-go rule seems like it would pretty much shut down most of that legislation. Also, can I get a picture with you, whoever it is, because I'm a big fan.
Yeah, it's not a principle that the Republicans believe in. They used it as a weapon against anything Obama wanted to do, and then they spent like drunken sailors, and the deficit is going like this. If you look back over the last 2 decades, what you'll see is every time you have a Democrat presidency, the deficit comes down. Every time you have a Republican presidency, the deficit goes up. And so it's astounding to me the hypocrisy of the senators I have served with who talked every single day about the deficit until they were in charge. And then when they had the chance to raid the Treasury, drive up the deficit to enrich the richest, they did it without a thought. It's simply this. Let's focus on the fundamentals. We could, by the way, fund a lot of stuff by reversing the giveaway to the rich. And so maybe we can pull the deficit down and do a lot of good for working America.
I'm going to ask you a question that doesn't really come up in Democratic discussions. It's the tariffs, which are destroying the family farms, I'm sure in your state. Is it possible for Democrats to reach out to conservative farmers who are being devastated by these tariffs? And I'd love to hear your thoughts about the Jackie Rosen part.
This is Senator Merkley's time. I'll talk to you about that afterward, though. I'm happy to.
But can you address what your thoughts about what the tariffs are doing, and if there's any possibility of Democrats reaching out to family farmers?
So when you think about trade, you should think about kind of 2 different dynamics, one on the agricultural side and one on the manufacturing side. On the manufacturing side, if you allow countries that have very low wages, low environment, low enforcement, have full access to our market, they put our manufacturers out of business. We've seen that on a massive scale. That's because factories can move overseas, but that's not true with agriculture. And what has happened is the president has had a very chaotic strategy of essentially throwing bombs rather than a carefully negotiated strategy to reduce the manufacturing trade deficit. So he's throwing these bombs or throwing rocks overseas, and so the Chinese respond by throwing rocks back, and they're hitting, for example, soybeans, they're hitting hogs, they're hitting a host of agricultural products, which is exactly why you should have a careful strategy to address the manufacturing deficit, not a chaotic strategy that results in basically deep damage to the farm. So I think there's a lot of room for partnership to take this on.
My question is, can Democrats reach out to some
That's
of these
what I mean by partnership. A lot of room for partnership. I've talked to a lot of farmers who are very distressed, who understand that you need to work on the manufacturing side, but we don't want to see the agricultural side damaged. And so I think there's absolutely a tremendous opportunity for partnership there.
Thank you. And at some point, we'd love to hear your answers.
Of course. All right.
Hi. Thank you very much for suing to fix what's going on today. I much appreciate that. I really respect your voice. However, I'm really angry about what happened yesterday by are the performance of the Democratic Party and our senators. They're unfocused and spending their 5 minutes grandstanding rather than really focusing, saying their piece, and moving the conversation forward. I mean, how can we fix this party that was so unfocused when they had this moment to really speak to what was going on?
Well, what happened yesterday is so distressing. It's just, I can't say how powerful. I can say how powerful. I thought Dr. Ford's testimony was the most authentic, sincere, genuine words that I've ever heard uttered on Capitol Hill. And thank you to her for doing so. And the whole situation where the committee, the Republicans, are saying, well, no corroborating information, no investigation. We're not letting any of the other women who have experiences to share them. The complete suppression of information related to this, treating her so much worse, and the situation so much worse than in 1991 with Anita. I think it is an enormously shameful moment. And I think my Democratic colleagues worked to find a strategy to essentially reach out and connect in a way that would produce a majority to stop this nomination. And I know that strategy that they used didn't resonate with everyone, but I know that they were so deliberate in trying to figure out not just how to get their name on the press, but how could we win this battle. So I think that's what, you may not agree with how they did it, but that was their motivation.
All right, we're almost out of time, so just these 2 questions, and then we'll be done. Go ahead.
All right, so you said you were deeply considering running for president in 2020. So I'd like to ask, because the president works on an international level, what do you believe is the greatest geopolitical challenge our country is facing and will be facing in the near future?
Yeah. Well, back earlier in my life, I switched from economic development to nuclear threats because I thought nuclear threats were the biggest challenge. Now we have nuclear threats and we have climate threats, 2 enormous factors. We have a lot of other international issues as well, human rights. I went over to follow up on Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader of Burma's invitation to see what was going on with the Rohingya. And then in the last day before I went, they canceled all of the access to the affected area. Then I went to the refugee camps in Burma, and I went to the famine areas in Africa, 2 of them. There's a lot of troubled places in the world. But the 3 things that immediately come to mind for me are nuclear issues, climate chaos, human rights, and actually I should throw in the 4th is economic strategy, because that's so important to the success of living wage jobs here in the United States.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello.
And maybe we should hold a little vote, because in my town halls, when people ask questions, I always do this, and I haven't done it here yet, so it'll be fun. I'll maybe have each of you raise your hand for which of those 4 items you think is the biggest concern. I'll just list them again, and we'll get a little feedback here. How many think the risk of nuclear war is the biggest issue? Couple hands. How many think climate chaos is the biggest issue? Quite a lot of hands. How about international human rights, American leadership on human rights? A fair number. And then economics, international economics. Very interesting. Economics and the issue of climate chaos won that poll.
It's been demonstrated that voting machines can be hacked. It's been demonstrated that voting machines can be hacked. Can we trust our voting machines not to be hacked? Or is paper voting better?
So voting machines can be hacked, is what you said.
Right.
And did you have another piece of that?
Are we doing something about voting machines to make sure we can trust them?
Yes, so to repeat that, she's asking, are we doing something about the voting machines to resist the ability of to be hacked? We are not doing nearly enough to keep international cyber strategies attacking the foundation of our elections. I haven't read it yet, but I understand the New Yorker magazine just had a big analysis that basically said the Russian intervention in our campaigns did change the outcome of the 2016 election, so I want to read that. But in terms of the voting machines, no voting machine should have any sort of electronic access that allows anyone into it. And some states have that as a rule. There was recently an article saying that there was a secret link into some of those machines. Furthermore, every single one should produce a paper ballot. We only use paper ballots in Oregon, and I must say Oregon's vote-by-mail system stops so many of the voter suppression strategies. You've got 2.5 weeks to vote. It's all on paper. It can all be recounted so easily. You can't change the precinct locations. You can't understaff the precincts. You can't, et cetera, et cetera. We need to have a voting system that absolutely thwarts a lot of these voter suppression strategies that, by the way, a lot of them are very racist strategies as well. We should believe in voter empowerment, not voter suppression. We do need to change the voting system.
Thank you. Senator, it's been a pleasure having the conversation with you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Wait, were you going to address Nevada?
No. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.